Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The next agenda item, Municipal Services Facility Financing Plan. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and attending tonight's meeting. This is really the beginning of what I believe is going to be an exciting opportunity for the town of Andover. The first piece of many of the efforts associated with really what the preface was, which was introducing the team and creating our vibrant downtown that we all desire so much, is coming up with a solution to what we know as Town Yard, which I'm referring to looking ahead as a municipal services facility. So I put together essentially a table of contents for the presentation. Paul, if you don't mind. The first being understanding capital capacity and developing a capital improvement program. I'm going to show this two ways, and it's really important to start the presentation off with understanding capital capacity because I'm going to refer to it a lot. I have been referred to it a lot. And I'm going to show it in a graphical representation, and I'll also show it in a more of a technical representation because I think it is really the cornerstone to what we're trying to do. Next, we'll talk about 2016 town meeting, the recommended, or what I've recommended for action. I have submitted 3 warrant articles. I will go through them in summary format and then individually throughout the presentation. We'll also talk about operational considerations, specifically with regard to police and fire and fuel. We'll also talk about some of the operational considerations that are quite necessary for the Municipal Services Department, both Public Works and Facilities, that are unable to be implemented at the current site. Lastly, I'll touch on environmental concerns. And then perhaps the most important slide will be the last slide, which is what this means to you as a resident of Andover, taxpayer of Andover. I want ultimately everybody to leave here tonight with a good understanding of what this means today, what this means in FY17, and what this means over time. So with that, understanding capital capacity. So I've talked a lot about capital capacity, and what it means to me and how I frame it in terms of the budget is what the town is able to fund on an annual basis in capital. So there's really 2 sources to capital capacity. When I think about it, and I talk about it, and I refer to it a lot in the budget document, if anybody had an opportunity to read it, is what is our non-exempt capital capacity? And us in municipal government all too often are found using technical DOR terms that we're the only ones who understand, and I understand that. So one thing I want to try to do is really break it down so everybody's comfortable with understanding it and how we proceed. So non-exempt, so that is, what is our capital capacity within the limitations of Proposition 2.5? So what can we fund in cash or pay-as-you-go, meaning just what it is? What can we pay for cash, not have to borrow for? And what can we fund in terms of debt service within the limitations of 2.5? So this does not include debt exclusions or projects that have been funded outside the limitations of 2.5. This does not include water and sewer enterprise funds or capital projects associated with the enterprise funds, which are otherwise funded through the rate. So together, those 2 sources basically define what our capital capacity is. So this is the graphical representation. So what does this look like in context? One thing I've made a priority and will continue to make a priority, and it will certainly be transparent in next year's CIP, is that we should look at capital not as individual funding sources, but rather what are we able to fund as a percentage of budget? So is it 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%? I've said I would like us to see I'd like to see the town of Andover over time move to somewhere in the vicinity of 7% of budget. So now we'll move on to the technical side. So understanding capital capacity, we begin with what our total budget is, our recommended budget for FY17, which is $177,926,592. And we back out of the calculation things that are subject and naturally subject to significant fluctuations. So exempt debt, it's volatile. It goes up and it goes down. Water and sewer enterprise fund. This is the first step in hopefully a multi-step process to really identify water and sewer enterprise as a standalone. The general fund is the general fund, the water sewer enterprise fund should be considered the water sewer enterprise fund. So we back that out. And we also back out the other items that are funded to support the water and sewer enterprise fund, which is appropriations from water and sewer reserves through articles, and then also articles that are funded to support the operating or subsidize the operating budget from water and sewer reserves. And then lastly, we back out free cash. So as you'll see, free cash, the recommendation from 16 to 17 is to fund just about $1 million less than what we funded last year. We'll also have $1 million less of free cash this year than we did last year. So it's not really reflective of anything in particular, but rather reflective of the reality of the annual fluctuation, which I've talked a lot about over the past several months of free cash. So with that, we have an adjusted budget. And then we see capital projects from taxation. Those are the cash-funded projects. Non-exempt debt service. Again, debt service that's funded through the limitations of proposition. And then we come up with our total non-exempt capital outlay or our capital capacity. You'll see I'm recommending that 5.71% of the adjusted budget be used towards funding capital in FY17. It's an increase of 0.7 from what was funded in FY16. I will talk about this throughout the presentation, but what this provides us with the opportunity to do is fund projects within the levy limit that otherwise would require a debt exclusion, or conversely, not be able to be done. So, just a summary, and like I said, I'll talk about these each individually in the coming slides. 3 articles before town meeting this year. The first being the acquisition of 5 Campanelli Drive. 2, utilize capital capacity to fund design in the engineering phase. I'll talk more about that, but really why we're doing that before funding the whole project is that one of the best practices in the world of municipal capital budgeting is to fund design and engineering the year before, because it answers a lot of questions that otherwise would remain unanswered. So once you go through 50% design, 75% design, 90% design, and inevitably 100% design, you get a much better handle on the programmatic elements of a project and also what the actual cost is. Because I don't want to be in a position where we've got to go back to town meeting and call a special town meeting in addition to any other town meeting that will be required to fund the project, providing we're successful, and ask for more money because we weren't able, or we found things or figured things out through the design phase. And then lastly, establish municipal services mitigation fund. It's very rare in the world of municipal government to have an opportunity to offset the cost of one capital project with funds resulting from that capital project. So in the case of the municipal services facility, moving it from its existing site at 11 Lewis Street to 5 Campanelli Drive essentially provides the town with an opportunity to mitigate impact through revenue associated with 11 Lewis. We'll talk a lot more about that as we get going. So I'll start with talking about really 2 pieces with regard to 5 Campanelli Drive. So I'll talk about the financing, and then we'll talk about the site. And I will turn it over in a few minutes to Paul Matarazzo, Director of Planning, who's behind me, who will really talk a little bit about the DNA of 5 Campanelli Drive and the opportunities it presents. With regard to the financing of 5 Campanelli Drive, I'm recommending that the town appropriate $2.25 million from free cash. So essentially, it provides the town with the opportunity to purchase the site with cash, avoid any financing costs associated with borrowing for the purchase of it. I understand free cash is contradictory in the by nature of the term. So what is free cash for those who aren't familiar with the term? I put in two quotes right from the Department of Revenue. So a revenue source that includes actual receipts in excess of revenue estimates and unspent amounts in the departmental budget line item for the year just ending, plus unexpended free cash from the previous year. And again, that is the definition as defined by the Department of Revenue. So really, 3 contributing sources to free cash. What exceeded revenue, so we budget, and this is not things that are in excess of property tax estimates, but motor vehicle excise, meals tax, fines, fees, inspectional building and permits. We budget based on 5-year averages in Andover. It has served the community well in that we are generally not in a position with a revenue deficit when we're trying to close out the year. But when we do exceed those numbers, that all goes towards our free cash. Just like if we don't spend the entire amount that was appropriated, all the residual balances are essentially collectively certified as part of the free cash balance. And then lastly, whatever was left over from the prior year. Based on what I'm recommending for not only 5 Campanelli Drive, but for what has been recommended to be funded through the CIP with free cash, it will leave us with slightly over $1 million balance heading into town meeting, which is the highest balance the town has gone into town meeting with since 2012. With regard to the 5 Campanelli Drive site, the DOR says as a non-recurring revenue source, a prudent use of free cash would be to fund one-time expenditures. And that is really a key point, and the recommendation with regard to acquiring 5 Campanelli Drive is consistent with that statement. So moving on to 5 Campanelli Drive, the site. It's 15.16 acres of land. That includes wetlands, so therefore approximately 7 acres are buildable. What do we do with the other 8 acres? It really provides an opportunity that doesn't exist with any of the sites that any of the prior town task force, I think, really saw, which is it provides the town with an opportunity to buffer the site. So our ultimate goal here is to have a municipal services facility that you don't necessarily see from the street, you don't hear it, and it's really mitigates many of the issues we're currently experiencing and we have experienced with 11 Lewis Street or having a site in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Lastly, and I'll let Paul get into this when we look at some of the aerial views, but there's a real opportunity to access open space and enhanced opportunities to utilize the river for recreational activities. So the next 2 slides are visuals or aerial views of the site, and I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to situate folks of where 5 Campanelli Drive, the area that's highlighted in the green is this 15-acre site. The highway, of course, my laser pointer is not coming on right now. It's typical technology, right? This is I-93 going north. This is the Merrimack River. This is River Road. This is Old River Road. This is the Lawrenceville Technical School. For those open space enthusiasts in the room, this is the town's conservation land. It's also bounded by Old River Road, and this is Campanelli Drive. So access to and from the site would be in this general vicinity, and it provides an opportunity to provide for an area for parking for the public to access this open space parcel along the Merrimack River. I know that the Board of Selectmen are working with the Conservation Commission as we speak to enhance a public access along what we call a Heffron right-of-way. If we're successful in relocating the municipal service facility to this location, as an added benefit to the community, it's going to provide for some public parking where the public and the business community in the area will have superior access to the Merrimack River and town holdings along the river. In addition to the open space, we've started kind of conversations with the VOTEC as to opportunities to enhance their programming. You have a Technical School adjacent to the municipal service facility, and there's a number of opportunities for enhancing their program. In talking to the director, they welcome the chance to further tease out these opportunities. Just coming in a little closer, you could see the wetland area here that Mr. Flanagan had talked about as a buffer from the River Road and the business community. It's really well set back from the site, from River Road. The land area that is buildable is almost like a bowl. So it provides almost a natural opportunity to further enhance a buffer and kind of depress the building somewhat. This is the Heffron right-of-way. Again, this is the VOTEC.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to begin to get into the financing plan for design and construction for the new municipal services facility. This is a 5-year snapshot of how I envision this working. So when we started the presentation, we said capital capacity is really generated from 2 funds: cash capital, or pay-as-you-go, and debt service. What I've suggested is that $900,000 in FY17 be appropriated to fund design and engineering phase of the project. Debt service associated with the project is approximately $900,000. Once you actually go out to borrow, depending on the rate, it could be $920, it could be $880. But on average, we're looking at just about $900,000. So we start out in year 1 utilizing our cash capital capacity to fund design. In year 2 and beyond, that capacity, because that's what we have to think about it, not as 2 separate sources, but the town's capacity to fund capital, it moves over to $900,000 to debt service, and we fund the actual construction. So, again, we're going to utilize our capital capacity to fund both design and construction. It provides an annual appropriation. So what town meeting decides this year will provide for an annual appropriation based on the design component. We'll obviously have to come back to town meeting for the bond authorization, but when we do, we'll be very confident with not only the design, but we'll better understand the site and the total costs. And it reduced, and I'll talk more about this in a second, it reduced the impacts associated with project escalation. The project is escalating at a rate of $500,000 a year. The industry shows it. It's a clear signal of what's going on in the market. So the reason, in addition to purchasing 5 Campanelli Drive, I suggested we go ahead with design is that if we just wait to fund design at next town meeting, the project presumably, will be $500,000 more. And then if we wait 2 more years to fund the construction, the project could be $1 million more. So let's capitalize on town meeting. Let's try to fund the design. Design we expect would take 6 months. So I'd envision that we'd have a special town meeting either in December of 2016 or January 2017 to essentially mitigate the impacts of escalation. So I put together a very quick, or very simple graphic. Cash in FY17, debt service in FY18 and beyond. That results, and this is key, a one-time percentage increase in taxes. So the tax increase that we've proposed this year is about 3.85, 3.9%. That doesn't mean as a result of this project that it's going to be 3.8 or 3.9% every year. It means that it's going to be the adjustment this year that provides us the opportunity to design and construct the facility. It becomes a line in our budget. Design in cash, construction through debt financing. But I don't want people to feel as though that it's going to be the same increase every year, because it won't be. What it will be, none of us could say today. But this is a one-time adjustment, is a percentage increase in taxes that is going to provide us with an opportunity to avoid an override and a debt exclusion to fund this project. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. When I said that it's rare in the field of municipal government to really offset the impact of a significant capital project with revenue generated from potentially the same capital project, this is the mechanism that would provide us with the opportunity to do just that. So the third warrant article that I've submitted for town meeting's consideration is to establish a municipal services facility mitigation fund. So town meeting vote to support sending a home rule petition to the legislature that will establish a municipal services facility mitigation fund for the purposes of using certain and specific revenues from the future use of the site of the current town yard, 11 Lewis Street, to mitigate the financial impact of constructing a new facility at 5 Campanelli Drive. The article was written quite broadly in that it provides the town with an annual opportunity to decide how and what, and decide how to use revenues or what revenues to use. There will be one-time revenues, and there will be reoccurring revenues. One-time revenues, sale of land, permitting fees, potential utilization of recurring revenues, if that was the desire of the community and the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. What does it mean? So let's take the reoccurring revenues out of the picture for a minute. Based on some conservative estimates associated with the potential resale of 11 Lewis Street, and what we see in the market and what we see on a daily basis in terms of building and permitting fees associated with other projects in town, we have the opportunity to mitigate the annual impact to the taxpayer by 20 to 40%. So this is a lot of the discussion has been talked about, well, maybe we should rebuild it where it is. The cost of the actual project is about the same. This option provides the opportunity to mitigate it based on the potential for 11 Lewis Street, the current site. I feel as though this is probably the most significant factor in this whole plan. One thing I do want to say and make very clear is that, however, if we didn't use a single dollar from the sale or the redevelopment of 11 Lewis Street, the totality of the impact is at $900,000 number. We're not relying on that. So if it happens, it provides us with an opportunity that we can consider when it does happen. But it's not a requirement to making the project a reality. And I think that is really important to get across and to have everybody understand. We're not basing the plan on a set of unknowns. We are very comfortable with the plan. However, there may be an opportunity to mitigate impact. So, well, operational considerations, and when I started, I said we'll talk about police and fire. Both Chief Keefe and Chief Mansfield are here. Chief Mansfield's coming if he's not here, to talk a little bit about how moving Town Yard has an impact on their operations. It's something that, since I've arrived, has come up on a regular basis, especially with regard to mechanic work and fuel. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what our thoughts are in terms of managing those aspects of the project. Approximately 55% of all the fuel consumed are by municipal service vehicles. So plant and facilities, public works vehicles, 55% of basically the town's total fuel purchase. Police and fire do fuel up at the current town yard. So what I had asked each chief to do was look at how often they're in the vicinity of 5 Campanelli Drive. Each marked police cruiser is in West Andover at least once a day. Unmarked cruisers are in West Andover at least once every other day. Each fire truck is in West Andover once a day or every other day, responding to alarm sounding, the types of activity that requires a full response complement. Also, our 2 ambulances run to hospitals north or west of us many times a day. And we started thinking, how could we mitigate any impact, given that we know they're already out there? And we really arrived at a position of that it's solved by a standing operating procedure that we fuel at a 75% limit. So the fire department is already operating under this SOP, or standing operating procedure, meaning that if you're in West Andover and if you're at 75%, 80% full, you fuel up. So you're avoiding unnecessary runs to 5 Campanelli Drive. Another thing that I've heard is street sweeping. We street sweep all the sweep all the streets in town-wide on a couple times a year, but we sweep the streets in downtown a couple times a week. So one of the things Paul and I have talked about is that we would require any potential developer who purchase 11 Lewis to provide space for a street sweeper or any other real necessary or committed resource to downtown. Today, myself, Paul, and the leadership ICMA team were in Amesbury. So Amesbury just moved their town yard out of downtown, and the redevelopment associated, and they're doing it a little bit differently, but the redevelopment and the opportunity and the access to the river that is happening there is clear, and it's happening pretty quickly. But what we saw within the confines of the former site was DPW equipment that was non-conspicuously stored away and committed to the downtown. So we had been thinking that. It was nice to see it actually in action in a community in another place in the Merrimack Valley. I think it answers a lot of the questions associated with how do we get street sweepers in downtown where they have to be there regular basis. Also, it was new to me to know that they actually travel at 40 miles an hour now, so when needed, so they can get from wherever they are to downtown pretty quickly. Lastly, improve efficiencies that are not able to be implemented based on the constraints of the current site. Visit Town Yard. There's a lot of expensive equipment that is sitting outside. We have not a suitable wash-down facility for our vehicles after snow and salt events. The next picture, which is not of the greatest quality, and I know some people have seen it, really tells a story. The town's bucket truck, it's not in any way piece of equipment that's beyond what is necessary to run day-to-day operations, doesn't fit. So the town had to essentially kick out some of the cinder blocks in the back of the building. So they back it up and the bucket sits outside the facility in order to fit at the current site at 11 Lewis Street. So this is just one of the many deficiencies of the current site. We have been working and we continue to work through some of the environmental concerns associated with the existing site, and specifically what it means to Andover. So in 2013, the town did an environmental impact analysis of 11 Lewis Street. The graphic on the right essentially shows you where they did their testing. What we found from that is that the environmental issues are not all that significant and not beyond what you would expect from a DPW facility. So getting back to what that means for us, moving the Campanelli Drive and maintaining operations or expanding facility, we know we need to do something if we're going to stay at 11 Lewis, the existing site. So what is the big difference? The purchaser of land, 11 Lewis Street, would be required to remediate any environmental issues. We'll fully disclose it. We have fully disclosed it. We'll make the report available to anybody who's interested in the site. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the non-binding solicitation that is on the street right now to just help us kind of gauge interest and collect ideas of what developers are willing to do or investors are willing to do with the site. And we'd assume no liability to the town. Whoever purchased the site, it would be required that they remediate the site. This is not a new phenomenon. We're seeing it across Massachusetts on a regular basis. People who are coming in, developers are bidding with an expectation that they're going to be responsible for remediation. Maintaining operations or expanding facility 11 Lewis Street. Obviously, if we were to disturb the site as it currently stands today and do anything really with it, whether it would be moving buildings around or rebuilding, the town would assume 100% of the liability associated and costs associated with remediation. So this is, again, is just another opportunity to, when you look at the cost breakdown of one option versus the other, this is an expense that is associated with the current site that would not, or we don't expect to be associated with 5 Campanelli Drive. There's two real elements to this proposal. One is obviously solving a long capital need of the community, which is the DPW or the town yard, which would be a municipal services facility. But it also provides an opportunity for economic development. This is really where we're going to have an opportunity as a community to discuss what we want to see the future of our downtown look like. I'm going to talk very quickly about these bullets. These are just some of the factors that will be before the community for its consideration. Enhancing the tax base. Town Yard currently assumes 3.5 acres of the downtown on a commuter rail station with direct access to Boston. We generate obviously no tax revenue from that. It's in after town meetings vote last year to move forward with the historic mill district. It provides the opportunity for multi-use development. So there's obviously a revenue potential there. What exactly it is, we don't know. We can obviously project and based on activity we see in Andover and other places, have a decent idea of what that could be. Based on the proximity to the rail station, the MBTA has been working with us. So they own an acre and a half on the other side of the tracks, also not generating any tax revenue from. And one of the things they've talked to us about is they said this is very consistent with the administration's priorities. We would like, when you issue the non-binding solicitation, put us in with it. So a developer or an investor has the opportunity to come in, buy 5 acres in downtown, both sides of the tracks. It's a rare opportunity where an existing rail station already is. If there's any question about interest, we issued the non-binding solicitation last Tuesday. It is what it is, non-binding. Essentially, people who would be interested in purchasing the site would come forward with a proposal, just a general idea of what they would like to do there. We had 31 developers or investors, we don't know exactly what they all are, pull the proposal in the first 3 days. So the interest is real. Moving on to diversity of businesses and supporting local merchants, a vibrant town, all boats rise with the tide. I think in any way that we can redevelop or enhance our downtown, make it more vibrant, not only are the people who are coming here that may not be here today are benefiting, but the people that are here already are benefiting. Create connectivity between downtown and regional commuter rail station. We want to be able to have people come to Andover who otherwise may not come to Andover, take the train, spend the day, have an experience. Likewise, we want our residents to be able to live, work, enjoy our downtown, hop on the train and access Boston. Infrastructure improvements. One of the requirements that we included in the non-binding solicitation is that if anybody was to come in and buy that, they'd be responsible to contributing, if not funding, an appropriate reconstruction of the intersection that we all know too well, the 5-way stop, and also solve a long-standing issue to Andover at no expense to Andover. One of the other requirements of the proposal was to provide a plan for replacement parking. So if you're going to come in, how are you going to help us solve our parking problems? Or expand capacity, or provide information on how we could approach parking in a better way. And then lastly, maximize investment in our natural resources. So again, the team, Paul, myself, Lisa Swartz in the planning department, we spent the day, or a good portion of the day, in Newburyport and in Amesbury. In Amesbury, we crossed the river 4 times on footbridges that weren't there before, or some of them were, but not all of them there before they moved their town yard. In Newburyport, we walked along the boardwalk, which provides direct access and connectivity to the river. So a lot of good things are happening in Andover with regard to dam removal and really reestablishing the Shawsheen as a recreational opportunity for our residents. So those are, again, we're solving a capital problem or a longstanding capital issue. We're also providing the town with an opportunity for economic development. So lastly, what this means to you. The project costs are escalating at approximately $500,000 a year. The need is clear. There's an agreement that there's a need to do something and that the current facility does not meet the current needs of the organization, or do they meet the expectations of the town. So we know we need to do something, and I think the sooner we do something, the better it is for the taxpayers of Andover. That has been the basis for this proposal all along. It continues to be the basis for this proposal. Of the FY16 average tax bill in Andover is just over $8,900. $63.91 of the average tax bill will go towards enhancing our capital capacity. And that's one thing I really want to drive home. It's $63.91 going towards enhancing the town of Andover's capital capacity. The first thing we're able to address as a result of that is town yard. It's not just funding town yard. If that number goes down through mitigating it through other revenue sources, maybe we have the opportunity to fund another project within the levy that would otherwise require a debt exclusion override, which is the next bullet. So we will be able to fund the most significant project, other than a school project in Andover, within the levy limit and without an override. The last significant building project that the town, and when I say significant, I mean beyond additions, renovations, significant project that the town has done. When I say the town, we're one town, but the schools fund schools, and we all fund town and school buildings, but a town general government project was the Public Safety Center, which was 17 years ago and did require an override. It was just about a $15 million project then, and it required an override. I'm suggesting that we're able to do something of similar magnitude, but with far greater opportunity associated with it through the form of economic development within the levy. And I really think, and I said this when this whole effort started, that it's really a form of property tax stabilization. I've been part of 6 overrides in 3 different communities, and every day after the first issuance of the tax bill, people call the manager's office because there's huge spikes and there's huge drops. And I'm not saying the town of Andover is never going to require debt exclusion again, because for school building projects, they're necessary. But what I'm saying is that this sets us down a road where I'm very hopeful that we're going to be able to fund a lot of our facility needs on the town side. So public works, police, fire, senior center, without overrides. That goes to the next one. It's going to support our ongoing efforts to build a true capital improvement program that is both predictable and sustainable. I want, when we unveil the CIP next October 2016, to have a true 5-year plan that is based on a percentage of budget. We're 5.71% recommended for FY17. What that means, and absolutely attach a financing mechanism to the needs. So rather than say we're going to finance $13.6 million in 17, $29 million in 18, and $2 million in 20, have a level plan that is consistent, is sustainable, and provides us with an expectation that we know when we're going to do things. The last thing I want to see, and so many towns see it, is that these competing interests, and people go to town meeting and they vote against the project because theirs didn't get funded. My whole concept here, my whole approach and my goal is to really say, this year we're going to do this project, in 2 years we're going to do that project, in 4 years we're going to do this project, and begin to start building consistency so that when a capital project that requires a significant investment comes up, we understand the impact, we understand when it's going to be done, we're funding the design the year before the construction, and we really are doing, are promoting capital investment in a both manageable and reasonable way. Significant economic development in downtown Andover. I touched on that in the last slide. That's the second benefit to the proposal. And then lastly, as so many of us, I think, see, it's really a transformational opportunity for the town of Andover, and I think it's, I started the presentation by saying it's an exciting time. I still think it's a very exciting time, and I think this is the first step in a several-step process that will really engage the public in helping us define and frame what Andover looks like today and what it's going to look like in the future. So with that, we have a lot of people here that are able to answer questions. Myself, Paul Matarazzo, Director of Planning, Sandy Garrity, who is the Municipal Services Business Manager, Jeff Alberti from Weston and Sampson. Jeff, how many DPW facilities have you done? 110. Done 110, so we have significant experience in this field. We also have our chiefs here who are able to talk about some of the operational considerations for their departments. So we're here, we're happy to answer any questions. I certainly appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew and Paul, for that very comprehensive presentation. I'm going to open the questions for the board first, and then we'll go to the audience. So any questions from members of the Finance Committee, Planning Board, or Board of Selectmen?
Andrew, could you talk a little bit about the total cost of the facility? Like, for example, you mentioned the debt service was going to be somewhere between $880,000 and $920. So that's assuming a certain borrowing amount and a certain length of repaying that borrowing and a certain interest rate. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So in terms of an annual appropriation of approximately $900,000, that would service approximately between $17 and $17.5 million of debt. What I'm suggesting is, so the town hasn't taken advantage of it, I don't think, because it's relatively new as an option. In 2010, the municipal relief bill, municipalities were given the opportunity, when appropriate, to stretch the borrowing out up to 30 years. A DPW yard or a municipal services facility is certainly a 30-year facility, and why we wouldn't mitigate the annual impact, I don't know. So I'm suggesting the 30 years, $17 to $17.5 million at a rate of about 3.25%. We've traditionally borrowed less than that, certainly recently.
So help me understand the continuing, like, for example, you talked about a new fire station, a new senior center, things like that. So if we use that 17 million capacity for the town yard, and then that is going to be 30 years in duration, do we have to wait 30 years to do the senior center or the fire station, or how's that going to work?
I don't think at all. So there's really three pieces to it, I guess. The first being, I think we're going to be able to mitigate that by 35-40% and therefore give back some capacity that we could basically backfill with another project. I think that's one. I think two is that by looking at capital capacity as a percentage of budget, as the budget increases, whether it be 1% or 4%, there'll also be additional capacity. And when we start looking at cash and debt as one pool, I think we'll have the opportunity to do things differently. So as we know, the Capital Projects Fund has basically, for the past several years, been 1.6% of budget. Maybe we spend less in cash and expand our borrowing capacity on certain projects that provide us with the opportunity to essentially do more. So I think that is another big piece of it. So I'm not suggesting that we wait 30 years and then do the next project, but rather probably wait 2 or 3, have an opportunity to see what happens at 11 Lewis, and then begin to see how we fit those pieces in. And I will tell you, based on the approach of funding capital as a percentage of budget, the CIP that's released in October will include other projects based on a series of assumptions, including any mitigating impact.
In the 20 to 40% mitigation, what is that driven by? Is that by more taxes coming in because there's real estate that's on the old town yard site that is generating taxes, or what's driving the mitigation piece?
So there's mitigation, the way I see it, is really being driven by three sources, two approaches. There's one-time revenue. If the town decides to sell the land, there'll be a value to that. If the town decides to lease the land opposed to selling it, there'd be an annual cost associated with that. And then there will be certainly permitting revenue, which is another one-time one. There'll also be a taxation impact, and I think at some point we can talk about whether or not we essentially direct a portion of taxation as we deem appropriate once we have a better handle on what actually is going there. Because depending on what goes there, the need of services to serve whatever goes there will be more clear once we know what's actually going to go there. We can then make a decision: is it 25%? Is it 10%? Is it 0? That we can essentially earmark to further reduce debt service. So 3 sources, one-time and reoccurring. What I'm suggesting out of the gate, based on that 25 to 40% range, one time. I did not consider any reoccurring as part of that calculation. So if you did decide to add in the reoccurring, that 40% may become 60, 70, 80%. We don't know exactly what the tax impact will be.
Lynn?
So, Andrew and Paul, I guess, while you're considering the development proposals that come in, we've seen a big change in the school budget as a result of increased diversity. We're going to be looking closely at mixed use. There's going to be a residential component to this. Is there, while you're evaluating this, can you somehow include, along with environmental mitigation, impact to school fund donation, something that will help offset the change in the nature of our student population to help reduce the enormous and sudden costs that we're seeing this year.
Absolutely, and we have begun to really begin wrapping our head around it. I think one thing that we will learn when the responses to the solicitation come back is what people are actually thinking for the site, and that will help guide that discussion. So there's a site visit from potential developers on 22nd, Paul?
March 30th.
March 30th, and then they'll basically be reviewed shortly thereafter. We'll make all that information. So we'll try to quantify that once we have a better idea of what people are proposing. And the nice part about doing this trial run before having a binding solicitation is that we will have the opportunity to learn and see what maybe did we not include for the requirements that we might want to include for requirements.
Identify your market.
Bingo, right.
Absolutely. Any other questions, comments? Hearing none, we'll go to the audience. If you could please identify yourself, please, with your question. Thank you. Mr. Pasquale? Oops.
We'll bring it to them.
Paul, do you have a microphone? Yeah. Thank you.
John Pasquale, 47B Whittier Street. First thing, Andrew, I'd like to commend you. Great presentation. Secondly, I'd like everybody at this moment to never use the word town yard again. Being serious about it. A yard, if you think about it, this is a municipal.
Senator, yeah.
Here's my brain coming forward. I heard everything here, but you got to put it down. Chairman of the Finance Committee asked you, what is this going to cost? You don't see it in this. So you got to explain how this thing got up to $17.5 million, because there's a lot of people 79 years old heard originally it was probably going to be 10 or 12 million. We got the land cheaper than we started with. My next thing is, because it's municipal, I think there's great opportunities that we could take some other things and put it in there, and I want to make sure that we get it. For example, we don't need the engineering division up at the water treatment
Absolutely.
plant. I think we ought to adopt a policy, like, one-stop shop. So outside of our present town offices, when a contractor comes there, take the role of the contractor and see what he has to do around here. So we ought to be thinking maybe Matarazzo ought to be over there. I'm dead serious what I'm saying. I'm dead serious. Think
That's
about
great.
these other things, because as I go around, people in the building are saying they're out of space. So if we use our brains and think about this zoning, or whatever these contractors have to go, consider putting it in that facility. I don't even know what it looks like. I don't know if it's going to be 2 stories. I don't know if it's going to be steel. I don't know if it's going to be all concrete walls, etc. Okay? But whatever you put over there, it might be too heavy, because remember where we are. We got a lake on both sides of us over there. All right? I'm serious.
Ms. Pasquale, I really appreciate the comment, and I think one of the greatest benefits of the project is the consolidation of resources. And one of the big pieces of that is to have Public Works Administration and engineering out of the the water treatment plant, and begin making that a secure facility, as it should be. So putting everybody in the same place is going to be a real priority of this.
All I'm advocating for the left brains in the audience and the right brains, you better start with the total cost and explain. Because all the numbers here, all it says is we're going to borrow $900,000. That's $4.5 million. You got 2.6 for the land. Where is all this other money coming from? And making statements of it's going to go up by $500,000 in cost. We got to nail it down.
I appreciate the comment, and like I said to response to Chairman Stump, the $900,000 essentially services 17 to 17.5 million a year in debt. The reason I haven't totally committed to the number is because we haven't gone through a design phase, and that is really going to tell us. 17.5 million includes a bunch of contingencies, things that may or may not be necessary. So the reason I didn't want to put this forward as an all-in, because we didn't have, in my opinion, the appropriate level of information to proceed with an all-in. If I'm asking the taxpayers for $17.5 million, I want to explain to you exactly what $17.5 million means.
This is what's going to happen at town meeting, so you might as well get it tonight. No, I'm serious. I'm trying to help you, all right? I don't want to see this thing fail, I'm telling you, because I've been through every one of these since 2005. This is our best opportunity. We got to be more transparent with the numbers. Help them, will you, Mr. Quinn?
Thank you very much. Mr. Rowley?
I agree with everything he said. I also agree with Mr. Stump's questions. But I'm trying to look forward. This year, you say it's a one-time jump on the tax rate for this, I assume, the 900,000.
Right.
So what would it be next year if this is a one-time leap?
Thank you for asking the question, and I apologize if I wasn't more clear. So it will be 900,000, but it won't be 900, 900, 900, if that makes sense. So my expectation, it's 900,000 in the capital budget this year, it's 900,000 in the capital project next year, but it's not 1.8 next year, if you will. So
Yeah.
that 900,000 carries forward and actually declines as the amortization schedule carries forward.
All right, this year, on a $600,000 home, according to the newspaper, the taxes will go up, I believe it said $350,
Approximately.
approximately. So,
But not associated, that $350,000 increase is not, that's funding every increase in the budget. School department, town departments, fixed costs, legacy liabilities, everything. This of the average tax bill is $63.
okay, I understand that, but we're still going up $350. What do you foresee the tax go up for the next year? The reason I'm asking that is, in my brain, what I see, you're taxing to the max, right? 2.5% levy every year, correct?
So the proposal
Just a
that,
moment, Mr. Rowley, if you could direct your question to the chair, and Mr. Flanagan will respond.
Oh, I'm
Thank you.
sorry. Be
Thank you.
glad to do that.
Just procedural.
What I see happening is it's approximately $9,000 a year tax for a $600,000 assessed home. If it goes up $350 the coming year, and then maybe $400, $450 the next year, what I see occurring is, over a 2-year period, we're approaching a $1,000 increase in taxes on that $600,000 home. And 2 years later, another at least $1,000 increase in taxes. So in a 4-year period, a $600,000 assessed value home could go up $2,000.
so it's very hard, and I'm going to try to approach it in a few different ways. It's very hard to predict, if not impossible, out-year tax increases, because there are a lot of things we don't know. The actual value of new growth, market things that may force increases in some of the services we provide that we just don't know today. There's a certain element of surprise every year to us when we're preparing the budget. But to answer your question, I think there's two things that really drive my priorities when I'm putting together the municipal budget, and I think all the department heads here would agree, is that we have two jobs: meet the expectations of the Andover's residents, and two, find ways to either get creative, to mitigate impact, and manage tax growth. It's a commitment of mine. It'll continue to be a commitment of mine. I can't say that next year it'll be 3% or 0 or 5%, but what I'm telling you is that we're going to do everything in our power as the administration to manage that in a reasonable way every single year. The department heads that, have been here with me for the past 6 months, they'll tell you it was a driving force in all of our discussions this year, and it'll continue to be. So I'm unable to tell you exactly what it will be, but I'll tell you that we're cognizant of it, and it's going to be a consideration in all of our discussions.
Okay, my second question, in every presentation I've heard, you can pay for town projects with this method that you're using, but you always say excluding school projects. And we just had a study, or a study is going on, discussing the needs of the school buildings, the classrooms, they all set up right for education. We know that they want a early childhood center. They talk about the high school, the media center, the cafeteria. The place is too small for the amount of high school kids. It could go on and on. And so excluding those projects in the presentation leads me to think that we're going to perhaps vote yay for the direction we're going, and then all of a sudden, we're going to hear that we now have to add to that because of the needs of the schools. And as a senior in this town and an advocate for trying to reduce the rate of increase that we have experienced for many years, all I can think of is we're going to get slammed at some point because of those needs. It's going to get added to our 30-year liability that you are proposing for the town yard, the fire station. At the moment, I can't think of anything else, but I'm sure there's something else. And I just feel that we need to know...
the facilities, the municipal facilities building, Mr. Pasquale, right? I'm teasing. You didn't want to use the town yard.
Oh, yeah, the municipal. Okay. But what I'm saying is, these things always happen to us where...
Mike, can you get to the question?
Yeah, it's just that Mr. Stump just said something to me, so I looked to Mr. Stump. Forgive me, Mrs. O'Donoghue. Again, I guess I'm asking, what about those extras that involve potential school, needs that we are going to have to face and pay for that are not included in this plan? And they're there. And they're staring us in the face, am I right?
And I think...
I'm asking you because you're the chair and I'm directing this to you. Am I correct?
And I'm answering you, Mike, and I'm saying I'm going to defer to the town manager to talk about the facilities study that's underway, which will answer your question, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Rowley, I appreciate the question. So I think the biggest value of the facility master plan will be an identification of need. I don't want a big debt exclusion project sneaking up on you, and it won't. So if we're going to have to fund the replacement of a school or a significant renovation of a school that would require debt exclusion, I want to be able to communicate to the community when that will be, what the impact to that will be, and what are some of the other things we can do to even mitigate that impact through the financing of the entire organization. So the biggest, I think, value of the facility master plan will be providing us with a prioritization of need and an identification of need, and then we can start preparing over the long run, because I don't want to be in a position where we're 17 to 18, 18 to 19, 19 to 20, but holistically look at it, and so we can start having these conversations now. You know when things are going to happen, you know what the impact is, and what can we do to mitigate that impact in advance of it actually becoming a reality.
Okay, I know I've been very negative. I just want you to understand that I do like, the direction you're going in terms of how you're looking at things. It's just that I don't think everybody thinks about what I talked about, and that's the additional expenses that could occur. And I got to tell you, the seniors are going to, even on your basic plan of taxing to the max of 2.5% and whatever, it gets added to that because of payrolls or increases in contractual agreements. It really hurts the seniors. All right? And
I think the
that's it.
plan moving forward, to plan and prioritize our capital needs is extremely important. It's going to be a long-term view, which will be, reviewed on an annual basis. But at least the plan will be in place. Anybody over this side? Okay, there's another gentleman to the rear. Paul, back here. Yes. Oh, sorry. Didn't see his hand.
Hi, Madam Chairman, Tim Turbot, 55 Haggett's Pond Road. I have 3 quick questions. May I ask all 3, or do you want them one at a standing?
Well, are they long or short?
They're short,
I guess you...
and it's up to you to judge. The first question is, what are the anticipated environmental constraints at the Campanelli Drive site? Get to the wetlands, and you're close to the river.
Okay, so who's best to answer that? I'm not the expert here.
Paul?
Paul?
Any project that would be proposed for 5 Campanelli Drive in proximity to any wetlands would have to go through a conservation review process and comply with appropriate wetland bylaw requirements.
Okay, so I'm assuming we believe it would pass. All of that, and we could build on this.
Well, if I could jump in real quickly, one of the things we're doing is, so 5 Campanelli Drive is obviously owned by its current owner, but we're in the process of accessing the site, and we're going to do some initial testing to better understand the site. So we've developed a contingency within what we assume to be the budget to deal with some of those things, but we'll have a good handle on a lot of that before we move forward.
Paul?
And just as a quick follow-up, I'm very confident that something can be built at 5 Campanelli Drive. This parcel has been previously permitted by the planning board for a 100,000 square foot facility. So the process of teasing out whether it's buildable per se in proximity to wetlands, water bodies, and other has already kind of been battle tested by the private developers.
Okay, I was just concerned if there were certain things for a municipal facility or not.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Second question, on the, and I'm going to use the wrong word, the offset fund from Lewis Street, why, I'm a put things in the box person, why don't we allocate everything that we get from this to offset the new one? Why is it worded so as you put it broadly?
Andrew, do you want to take this?
Sure, so it's certainly an option, and it's one that, once we have the special act providing town meeting allows us to send it to the legislature, I think it's a discussion to be had, because it obviously can have the one-time revenue has a significant impact, but the reoccurring revenue would also have a significant impact. So the reason it was written broadly is that it would provide the town with that flexibility and enable the opportunity to have that discussion.
Andover as a town has a propensity for taking revenues where we thought could be used one place and magically having them disappear over the years. My third question is, when we look at redevelopment of Lewis, I live out near the Raytheon facility, and the apartments building are killing ourselves and our school system. Is there any way to exclude more apartment development from Lewis Street? That's my last question. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. Paul, do you want to take that? Thank you.
I would say that the zoning as part of the historic mill district, which town meeting voters overwhelmingly approved last year, include a mix of uses, which includes housing, commercial, retail, and other. The benefit that the town has, where we actually control the land, we can actually help dictate the terms as to how the parcels redevelop. As the town manager has indicated tonight, we do have a non-binding solicitation on the street to solicit ideas. You know, what would the development community like to do to respond to this blank palette? So based upon those responses, it's an opportunity for the community to take a look at what those responses are to help guide if and when we get to the point that we put this land out as to what we want to see happen. It may include housing, it may not include housing, it may include housing with restrictions. That's all something that the town will have to consider if and when we get to that point.
Thank you. We have another question over here. Mr. Fink, yep.
Greetings, everyone. Steve Fink, 26 Bateson Drive. I just wanted to respond to a couple of questions from the audience and Mr. Chairman Stump's question as well. I've been visiting the town of Amesbury for 3 years now, and worked with a lot of the town officials in Amesbury and also of the town officials in Newburyport. And if you ask the town council in Amesbury why they invested in moving their town yard, it was to work the very issue that's been discussed. The only fundamental way they could see to change the tax challenges their community faced was to invest in the community in a way that would allow other people to invest in it as well. So as we go through this discussion, I think it's important to understand that we have to keep that in our mind's eye. These ancillary benefits, I understand why Mr. Flanagan isn't putting them on his chart yet, but come with me to Amesbury and let me show you how different it looks now from the photographs I shared with the team today about what it looked like 3 years ago. That's a palpable change. That's why I think we're doing this project. But we've got to get organized. We've got to keep covenant with the questions that are being asked here, and we've got to make sure we do it transparently. So I just think there is another answer to you about how we fix the taxes, and that's how we build the next school. We do it by changing the town's footings.
Thank you very much. We have a gentleman over on this side here.
Hi, Al Ruthazer from 12 Oldbury. Quick question about Lewis Street. It sounds like it's been proposed to take the entire parcel, redevelop it, but have both the environmental remediation and some sort of annex for I won't call it the town yard, but the town services, whether it's sweeper or fuel dump. Has it been considered to subdivide it so there'd be a pure annex for street sweepers and other municipal services, and then have the balance be available for development without any exclusions and without any extra requirements to, as we talked about, maybe house our street sweepers and other municipal vehicles?
So we haven't really thought, we haven't intentionally subdivided it or considered subdividing it yet, because one of the things we wanted to see is that maybe a developer, and this does happen, developer would come in and fund a space for us. I don't know if that's a reality yet, but it's something that we think can be a reality. So again, it was to kind of mitigate burden a little bit, but I understand what you're saying in terms of providing a distinct place for some of our municipal services type operations.
And
it's
getting the
something we're gonna-
maximum return for what we do give without those kinds of conditions, which can limit, drop down the price.
Excellent point, you're right. And then it's something we will, once we see some of the responses come in, something we'll absolutely talk about and consider. It's a great question.
Thank you very much. Gentleman at the rear.
Hi, good evening. Brad Wright, Greenwood Road. Thanks. It's really encouraging to see this. It's music to my ears for anyone who knows me that we're not trying to put this into a residential neighborhood. That being said, we're currently using the distributive model for town, as it is now, town yard, because of Lewis Street being small. So we have storage facilities behind the high school, we have them in the cemetery, and we have them in the Ledge Road landfill. Before this came up, just a few months ago, it was discussed and voted on to fund more money for the Ledge Road landfill to create new municipal storage facilities. I'm wondering, now that we're on to this, which seems like it's a great idea, are we going to consolidate, and by that I mean the rest of the so-called satellite municipal offices that are in residential neighborhoods? Can we get them out of the residential neighborhoods?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Good question. So I'm going to take all three sites, Cemetery, Ledge Road, and Red Spring Road. It is fully our expectation that the Parks Department at the cemetery would be moved over to Campanelli Drive. For obvious reasons, some cemetery-type activities would stay in the cemetery. With regard to Red Spring Road, that facility has minimal impact on residents, and right now, we're going to see if it's appropriate to move to Campanelli Drive. But it's basically our maintenance headquarters, carpentry, supplies, and our biggest facilities adjacent to it in the high school, sort of tucked away back there. So I would say that is one we're going to look most closely at. Ledge Road, so this is something we're beginning to talk about as we gain a better understanding of the site and what might be required in order to take any of the activity that is proposed to happen there, or to a certain extent is happening there, and move it. I don't know if we'll have the answer to that question before May 2nd, but we've certainly heard from the residents on Greenwood, and it's going to be a part of the discussion. But we need to understand the site better, and we have to understand what may be necessary in order to consider that feasible or not. So we're looking at all three. The one definite is the Parks Department out of the cemetery.
Sorry, just going to put follow-up.
Sure.
Part of that is that, oh, sorry. So since it's been voted on to fund, or at least to put a proposal out there to fund the Ledge Road site, the landfill, to put more storage facilities there, I understand that you may not have the answers and may not be ready, but should we be trying to spend municipal money funding that now before we know what the full scope of it is?
Where myself and the leadership at Municipal Services are talking about it now. So more, I don't mean to pass on the question, but it's something that we've had initial conversations about, but it certainly require more extensive discussions over the next couple of weeks and months.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
There's a gentleman's been standing at the rear very patiently. Thank you.
Very patiently. Jim Curtis from 5 Orchard Street. I want to ask, and just bear with me because I might have to grope my way toward the questions about the mitigation fund in general. So I'd like to know sort of from two perspectives. One is a legal perspective, what's allowed versus prohibited versus what's more of a policy discussion. I guess I've run some numbers, just hypothetical numbers. I want to say at the beginning that I'm going to be asking you for some hypothetical responses, and we can all agree right now it's hypothetical. But just running some numbers, if that site were to be sold, let's call it $4 or $5 million that a developer came in and purchased. Question one, would that, call it $5 million, go directly against the 17 such that we would only have to borrow 12, or would the funds from the purchase by a private developer come into the general fund and be spent however they might be spent? And I guess the same question on the permitting fees. And then similarly, if the site were to be redeveloped into housing, retail, mixed use, could those property tax revenues from the new development be dedicated to, what did you call it, the capital fund, to offset the debt service payments from the project? Just back of the envelope calculations, making some assumptions, it could very well offset completely, maybe not in year one, maybe by year 5 or 10, but certainly over the course, before the debt were to be paid off, if all the property tax revenues were to be dedicated against the debt exclusion, it seems like the project would pay for itself. And if I were the owner of that site as a private person, this is a no-brainer to me. However, I understand from, you were being a little careful in the presentation about, using 20 to 40% mitigation. Is that because there's some legal restriction, or is that more of a policy decision?
Thank you, Mr. Curtis. So I'm going to try to answer them all in the order in which they were asked. So legally, state statute and Department of Revenue regulation, when it's implemented, doesn't obviously consider everything that could potentially ever happen in our 351 cities and towns. So the special act that would establish a mitigation fund would provide a legal financing mechanism that just by virtue of the statute isn't available to the town of Andover right now. Other communities have done it, I've done it in other communities, and what that would allow for is the deposit of one-time revenue, and if the community so desired, reoccurring revenue, and I'll tell you how both would work and what the impact of both would be. So we'll use your number, 4 or 5 million hypothetically, if 11 Lewis Street was to be purchased for that amount. What I envision is the way that would structure the financing, that it would just essentially pay down the debt immediately, rather than draw it down on an annual basis, because if you're drawing it down, you're incurring interest costs that otherwise you wouldn't. So that's that. So that's the 25 to 40%. So sale money and permitting revenue, that's where that 25 to 40%, and the fluctuation is based on the some of unpredictability of it. But the fund would be established by special act that would allow for property tax revenue to essentially come in through the general taxation and then be diverted to the fund in which we could charge the debt service to directly. So not to get into the entire tax recapitulation process in Massachusetts, but the tax recap form essentially allows all revenue here, and then it would essentially be directed through our annual Department of Revenue's tax recap process to the fund, and then we would just charge the debt service to it. So to answer your question, 25 to 40% is one-time funds. Again, hypothetically, could that percentage be 80% or higher? The potential is there, if you redirect the reoccurring revenues.
To elaborate, for the simpletons, me included, let's use a hypothetical number. Say there was a $17 million construction cost. The Lewis Street site were to be sold for $5 million, net of 12. Do you borrow 12 and then say there's a $500,000 a year cost for the interest and the principal and interest? Were the increased tax revenues because of the development, were they to be $500,000, the project would pay for itself? Correct? Am I presenting that?
Right, so if all those assumptions played out exactly as you laid them out, the project would essentially pay for itself. So I just want to put this out there. There's a difference between a bond authorization sometimes and what we actually borrow. So I envision that the bond authorization will be for what we fully need, because we know we're going to want to start constructing if town meeting provides us with the opportunity to do so. And the sale is not going to happen exactly at the same time. So what I would suggest is we'd borrow what we need and then use any revenue to offset the difference, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Over here, we'll stay here and then we move over to this side. Thank you.
Good evening. As we've heard tonight that there will be, Joe Albuquerque, 197 Greenwood Road.
Joe.
As we've heard tonight that there will be other major projects due to our aging infrastructure, such as, and should be, Ballard Vale Fire Station. Have we considered selling other town-owned parcels in residential areas to offset costs, plus enable the town to generate additional property tax revenues, potentially contributing to the mitigation process?
Great idea.
Who would like to take that?
I can take it. So the only parcel, well, not the only parcel, but the parcel that we're talking about today is obviously 11 Lewis Street, but I can tell you that anytime the school committee or the Board of Selectmen presumably takes a vote to surplus a parcel, one of the things we always discuss is whether it's in the town's best interest to resell or do something that is otherwise in the town's best interest. Right now, not even 11 Lewis Street has been surplused. So I guess what I would say is that anytime that activity happens, we're always going to look at, one, what is the value of selling it? in the open marketplace, what is the potential value of any potential reuse to the town, and go through a very public and deliberative process as part of that. So to answer, yes, when those opportunities arrive, we will do that. In terms of other taxation to further mitigate, anything in particular that you think you're referring to, or just? And it's a really great question. And one of the things that we've begun a process of doing is that when we do have savings in other functions of government, that we repurpose them in a way that essentially looks at operational considerations over here and capital and fixed costs and obligation type activities over here. And if the savings is created in one of those functions, that it's be redistributed in another, within that same function. So that is absolutely something that we're considering and will continue to consider.
Thank you. We have another question over here.
Thank you. Bob Willard, 76 Tewksbury Street. I heard three things that I really liked tonight. One is the plan to actually move Town Yard. Two is the related plan to get some value out of the old Town Yard through the overlay district. And three, the financial mitigation plan to smooth out some of the peaks and valleys of the tax situation. But I encourage you to go like gangbusters on the whole thing, because we've been arguing about moving the Town Yard since approximately the end of the Civil War. It's really time to do something. But my question specifically is, what are the real considerations between selling Lewis Street and continuing to own it and issuing long-term leases to the businesses that want to move in there so that we can keep long-term control of that property? Thank you.
Sure, thank you, sir. So we're still in the process of wrapping our head around the benefits and cons of both. Obviously, on the surface, sale is upfront cash, where a lease may be an annual payment that would be offset on an annual basis. Those are the two big ones, I believe. But also part of the leasing arrangement is that we maintain ownership of the site. So one thing we're trying to get to the bottom of, and this will come through our discussions with people who may be interested in the site, is there, does a lease versus sale arrangement have any impact, or does it impact interest in the site? And we don't know that right now. And I think it's something that may not be even an issue. It may be something that is. But Paul and I have been talking about that, and we're going to make it part of the discussion when we begin doing site walks and site visits with people who may be interested. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
Two more questions over here.
John Pasquale, 47B Whittier Street. I'm going to ask about a schedule. I'm going to talk about the word benchmark. There's no schedule applied. If the money was given to Andrew tomorrow morning, the way this project looks with numbers, it's going to be like 3 or 4 years. We were talking about a drop-dead date in 2005. The building was going to fall. Engineering-wise, I can conceive what this ought to look like because I saw other presentations by different groups that study this. So I don't want to see us reinvent the wheel. We ought to benchmark. Go down to Lexington, go up to Windham, New Hampshire, go back up there to Amesbury. There's things that they have there that we don't have to spend a lot of engineering to do. So the engineering costs ought to be looked at, and it would expedite the schedule. I think the building, personally, on fast track could be put up in 2 years. That's the target. You haven't said anything about the schedule. So talk to the audience about the schedule, please.
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Pasquale. Ideally, what I would see the schedule is, providing the town meeting voted favorably for the 3 articles, that we would, obviously, any money appropriated becomes available if it's appropriated at an annual town meeting, July 1. We would go through a process of getting in between, let's say, May 2nd and July 1, go through a process of getting an engineering firm lined up to do the work so they could begin July 1. Generally designed for something like this is 6 months-ish, which would put us in a position, let's say if we're at 90% design in December, have a special town meeting that would fund the construction, or at least provide us with the bond authorization to move forward. And then you'd be looking at probably mobilizing spring of 2017, and then we're looking at a year, 12 months. So you're a year to 18 months max. So your 2-year projection's right on. And we will certainly try to leverage what has been designed and in other facilities around the Commonwealth. They're happening in quite a few places right now. Medford just did it, Wayland just did it, Lexington did it several years ago, Bedford did it, Wyndham did it. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel on something that is a large part, pretty simple facility.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman to the rear.
Tim Turbot, 55 Haggett's Pond Road. Just like to reiterate, and unfortunately left, the gentleman in the back, oh, there you are, consideration, and urge you, if you were to make the remediation, I think I used the right word, article, much cleaner, that says all, instead of all of the funds would go towards the site and offset it, versus at some discretion or some other words. I personally would feel better about voting for this article, because I see a real attempt to keep things in a box. Oranges, oranges. So I encourage you to do that.
Thank you so much. Any more questions from our residents? Thank you all very much for attending this very important presentation this evening. Your questions have been wonderful and help us to flesh out every aspect of this project, so that when we bring it to town meeting, it's been fully vetted before we ever get there. So thank you all again. Susan? Okay.
Sure.